Big 10 Plus 4 is a member of Odd Pods Media and ASAP All Sports All Plays Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome on into Big 10 Plus 4, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I'm Dalton Shetler, Tony Hollinsworth there in the middle. If you're joining us on the visual medium, Sam Sprunger on the far side. Fellas, how we doing? Happy New Year to you.
I guess.
Doing great, Sam. I gotta gloat a little bit. I just want to say, in the words of Coach O, go Tigers.
And I have something for you. If LSU could not beat a JV team, they shouldn't be a college team any longer. So congratulations.
I mean, if that was the case, then who else would Michigan play to start out their season?
You're
where
right.
They can be like 6-0.
It's a fair point. And of course, the inside joke for some of the listeners, Sam is a diehard Purdue fan. Tony likes about 18 different teams.
Yeah.
One of them happens to be LSU.
Exactly.
And that's
He just doesn't know how to choose.
celebrating the Citrus Bowl victory. But we'll be talking a little bit about some of those things because it wasn't just the 63-7, I think the final score was, the pounding of Purdue in football, but later on that day, things went pretty sour on the basketball court as well.
I even gloated about it on social media. I'm like, man, this working's tough. Got Mississippi State and Illinois in this game, and then I've got Purdue and LSU, and then I've got Purdue and Rutgers later, and oh my gosh, it turned into a dumpster fire.
Yeah. So we're going to be getting to that a little bit later, but much as what we're talking about the bowl season, one of the inspirations when we started this show, we were talking about, we really wanted to kind of capture the core of what the Midwesterner and the Big Ten fan is. And a lot of it in recent times is dealing with scrutiny with performance on a national stage, but really trying to defend and uphold the strength that the Big Ten proves over the course of the season and why the Big Ten should have a certain respect. Big Ten oftentimes gets disrespected, and the Big Ten was so close on two occasions to breaking through and getting into the national championship game in this college football playoff, the first time they ever had multiple participants in the college football playoff. Ohio State just a missed kick away. Michigan really just kind of tripped over itself in a lot of instances with how many times they had the ball inside the 5. And what has been the greatest college football playoff semifinal series that I think we've ever seen since this started, back in 2014. Mm-hmm. So in the 8 years that we've had this, 9 years that we've had this has been the best series of semifinal games. But we were so close to having the Big Ten represented in a national title game, which has happened before, but really to maybe earn a different level of respect nationally, and it just didn't quite come through. That can be somebody's takeaway. My takeaway is what two brilliant games we got to see to help us decide a national champion here this season.
Yeah, as much as it was disheartening to see the conference not advance to next week, what you take away from that is literally, like you said, they tripped over themselves a few times. So a couple of plays in the red zone for Michigan and one kick, and we've got the game as the national championship game. So I while it's unfortunate that neither team got there, I think they both performed extremely well. Michigan once they settled in, but Ohio State, I think proved anybody that doubted they shouldn't be in there proved that they belonged in that playoff.
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to say is not only did Ohio State prove that they belong in the playoff, but both of these teams proved that they were the top teams in the country. I mean, we had a little bit of doubts as far as Ohio State goes after they lost to Michigan. And then, of course, everybody was complaining they got the quote-unquote back way into the playoffs because of USC losing, but then USC lost to Tulane. So we're like, maybe that's not exactly a bad thing because USC plays a very no-style defense.
But again, you got to look at it. It's a bowl game that didn't have any matter.
It's a bowl game that
while
matter.
USC was trying to win and Tulane was trying to win, it didn't hold that height of you win, you play for the national championship.
Right.
A little different.
Right. But still, I mean, both these teams.
I get what you're saying, though.
Yeah. Yeah, but both these teams came in. They were absolutely fantastic, and like Dalton said, you couldn't have asked for two better games. Like Sam and I, Sam, you and I talked about it. From the Grown Ups movie. We're like, man, this TCU Michigan game is not going to be the sexy one, like the sexy sister. This is going to be the ugly
One
sister
piece
that
daughter.
we don't want to see this. And then come to find out, both games were absolutely fantastic. And what better? Well, not for us as fans of the Big Ten, what better way to end it than literally the kick on New Year's Eve to start the new year? Like
as the ball was dropping,
could not get any. Like again, Big Ten fans, it couldn't get any worse. Everybody else, it's like timing wise, that couldn't have gotten any better.
Well, I've got the perfect analogy. You guys are aware of the butterfly effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the ball dropping in New York swayed that ball to the left in Georgia.
Ooh. Interesting. That's a theory I haven't heard yet. So
you should have called timeout, Ohio State. You should have called another timeout.
Well, and I love too, because there's been so many videos of people that at parties, house parties, where they had multiple TVs set up, one with the ball drop, one with the game on, which we were one of those. But there's been videos of like Ohio State fans' reactions as the ball's being dropped. And they're like, oh my gosh. And it's somebody, Happy New Year. Boo. I mean, just terrific collaboration between those two. But while we're talking about the playoffs, let's go ahead. Let's focus in individually with what was the first one. Let's start off with the Fiesta Bowl, Michigan and TCU. Tony nailed this one, I think. And as you both had apparently talked about on Friday, that this game didn't necessarily set up to maybe be the best, but wow, were we wrong. And I think really the biggest part of us being wrong with this is Michigan, again, I think kind of got in its own way. We talked about and of course, a lot of people are focusing in on the officials, and ESPN's coverage really honed in on the officiating, the touchdown that was reverse. Look, I see it kind of both ways. I think it's a tough one. I'm sure people have very strong opinions, and that's okay. I get it one way or the other. I see kind of a little bit of nuance with that call, but then the next play, you fumbled a handoff trying to score 6. The first drive of the game, you get down to the 2-yard line. Now, remember, this is a program that just won the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line in the country. During the press conferences leading up, Michigan's representation was saying, if TCU wants to play that 3-3-5, we're just going to smash them in the mouth all game long. You have a 4th and 2 with the best offensive line in the country, and you call the Philly special. I don't understand why Michigan got away from being Michigan, and I think ultimately, I mean, you can blame officiating, you can blame different things, you can blame turnovers, the pick sixes, whatever. I think Michigan just got away from its identity, and it cost them this game.
They got too cute.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, okay, they did what the Seattle Seahawks did against the Patriots in the Super Bowl on the 1-yard line. They threw the ball instead of doing what they should have and just handed the ball off and blasted it. Interesting game, because TCU came out knowing they were just going to punch Michigan right in the mouth. And let's see how they react. They went with the Mike Tyson setup of everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, and then we were going to see how they react. Michigan didn't react well at first, and that's what got them in there. Do all you want with blaming officiating, but there's no point, and both of you will know this, and I've coached enough games to know that officiating will never win or lose you the game. They may make a call that finalizes it, but you did everything in your power to put yourself in that position. So Michigan doesn't have any room to complain about the officiating of, oh my goodness, we could have scored one. We only lost by 8 or whatever, and we had a touchdown taken away. We'll do better. You're supposed to be the number 2 team in the country. You dominated one of the other teams that's considered one of the best teams in the country. And yes, you're playing another one that's considered the best team, but you know what? You were expected to dominate them. Now, I'm not saying they should have necessarily dominated, but they should have shown up better than what they did.
Tony?
Yeah, and it's gonna sound crazy when I say this, but to me, you know what the turning point was of that game It was right at the very beginning when Michigan ripped off that 53-yard run with Donovan Edwards. I thought, man, this is what we expected. Like, they're going to dominate. And then, like Dalton said, because they're not used to playing that 3-3-5 defense. That's typically a smaller, faster defense. It's high risk, high reward type of defense. And when TCU, like Dalton said, got the stop on 4th and 2 with that whole Philly special, that to me was when TCU said, yep, this is our game. This is when we're taking over. This is when we take control. And, to let yourself get in that deep of a hole is what probably baffles me even more. It's 21-6. So, and they even pointed it out on the ESPN broadcast crew of, a lot of fans are asking, why doesn't Michigan get back to their identity? They can't. They don't really have the time. It's 21-6. TCU hasn't really shown that they can be stopped on offense. So defense, offensively for Michigan, they can't really eat up those big long drives that they're used to being able to do in the second half, because you may or may not get that shot again when you do that. So to me, that 3-3-5 defense, I think, is what threw them off, because there's not a lot of college programs that run that. And if they do, they don't always run it very successfully. Iowa State's probably our best comparison as far as a program that runs it pretty well. I think Texas A&M ran it this year, and we all saw
played
how
out
that,
well for them. Yeah,
that turned out super well. So I think it was not only Michigan kind of getting in their own way. I think Michigan underestimated TCU. I do. I think they came in and kind of to their point, you're a little cocky. You have the best offensive line again 2 years in a row. You have a formula that works. You found a backup formula that works with, having JJ throw, and, you're going up against a smaller defense. On paper, you should be able to dominate, but I do agree with Dalton and you guys that, they want to try to blame ref and officiating. And I watched both the plays that it happened. Don't put yourself in that position.
Yeah.
Like, it's not the ref's fault that you let TCU score 21 points. Like, that's the other crazy part is offensively, they didn't do with their identity, and defensively, they didn't do with their identity, but they haven't had to face a quarterback like Max Duggan, really. And I don't want to try to make too much of comparisons, because we saw more of it against Georgia than we had all season. You haven't faced a quarterback like that since CJ Stroud, and CJ Stroud didn't even really try to run against you as much as he did against Georgia.
Let's look at something too. I was listening to I believe it was Full Ride on ESPNU radio, and Brian Estridge was there. He's the play-by-play for TCU. He was on there, and he was talking, and they were asking him about this game, and does TCU have a shot? What do they need to do? Blah blah blah. Well, they brought up the Michigan line, and he says, let's think about something, guys. He said, if you go pound for pound, height, and everything average-wise, TCU's got a bigger offensive line. Nobody thinks about that. So when you've got dogs that are bigger than the ones that are the best line, and you're going to hold your own, because they're not shabby, they're not slouches. You don't get to this point to being a bad offensive line. He said, so we size up just fine against Michigan. He said, so it's a matter of execution. And I think that was where the game was won. TCU executed early and enough to get a lead that held Michigan at bay.
And you know what? Because you mentioned execution, and I think you're right. I think it goes beyond just getting out early. I think what impressed me most about TCU, because I still believe Michigan was the more talented team.
I do too.
I still believe that. And they came roaring back in that second half, and you could feel that wave coming, a momentum. And TCU answered the bell every single time. That's what astounded me throughout the game. Whether it was a pick six, whether Duggan came on and they drove down the field, TCU was there with an answer every single time the bell came calling. And that's what winning teams do. But there's been so many times that we have seen great winning teams not be able to have that kind of success against such a highly talented team. Because, I still hold that Michigan's the best team TCU's played this year. Like, I don't think TCU's played a team that talented throughout this season. I go back to think about, I'm wearing the Michigan State gear for our audio listeners that can't quite see it, but you think about the 2015 Michigan State season. That was a team of destiny. That wasn't necessarily Michigan State's 2013 team was probably better and more talented than the 2015 team. I think that's fair and easy to say. But the 2015 team just had a way to win games. The trouble with the snap, Jalen Watts-Jackson picking up and scoring the touchdown to end that game, Michael Geiger's kick at the horseshoe to knock off Ohio State. Like time and time again, they just found ways to win games. The drive against Iowa in the Big Ten title game that lasted like 10 minutes, and finally LJ Scott got across the goal line. Like, that's what TC reminded me a lot of. But then Michigan State got into the playoff, faced Alabama, and, well, I mean, they had – correct. They had to hurt Connor Cook at quarterback, and there's some different things. But, like, you saw, like, against this superior talent, like, just finding ways to win games just didn't hold the candle to it. TCU, playing that kind of way of just finding ways to win games, they were able to beat a superiorly talented team. I think that's amazing. I can't really remember the last time we've seen that on this stage.
Well, and I'll tell you that, everybody was criticizing TCU for the fact that they hadn't really dominated, and they only beat Baylor because they were able to bum rush the field and get a field goal off while the clock was running and to win it at the buzzer. They had a plan to establish that lead, and then if this happened to where Michigan stormed back, they still knew how to win in that situation. They set themselves up perfectly. I think they had the better plan. I think Michigan walked in cocky and thought that they were going to. They believed the headlines of this is going to be the game where it's easy to tell who's going to win because it's Michigan and TCU.
Well, and read the headlines. Like, their press conference clips absolutely back that up. Like, there are, I mean, quite literally quotes like that kind of support that they came in knowing that they were superior and kind of underestimated, maybe in a sense, too much to your point about TCU. Before we break and get to the second quarter, anybody else have a thought they want to share here? Want to make sure we don't close off. Tony, did you have something?
For anybody that doesn't know, and if you've never watched Futurama, TCU has adopted the Hypnotoad.
That's right.
And purple with TCU. So I'm not going to lie, guys. I'm going to say a little bit early.
Shirt, aren't you?
Huh?
You're buying a shirt, aren't you?
No, I thought about it. But they don't have any Hypnotoad shirts. If they had a Hypnotoad shirt, 1,000% would buy that.
Well, he needs a 19th team to support.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, how do they not get a hold of Matt Groening and say, hey, we need permission to use this?
I know. I feel like Futurama's been done for a while. I know they talked about potentially doing a reboot, but
might as well get a little spike in sales, right?
Exactly. And I mean, just think about it. You could have the Hypnotoad thing going, like in the bit, like it a huge marketing thing to.
And I think it'd be literally everybody but the state of Georgia buying those things.
So, and help me here too, because I've seen some Futurama, but I didn't know that's where Hypnotoad came from. I know Hypnotoad's a big phenomena right now that's got a lot of people excited. So what's the direct reference?
He's the psychedelic frog. So when you lick him, you have hallucinations and am I correct, Tony? Is there more to it?
No. I think that was The Simpsons.
Oh yeah, that's the sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. Hypnotoad. Hypnotoad just
cartoon.
He and the brain slugs just kind of appear, and they just make everybody dumb. Like the brain
That's right.
slugs will attach, and they slowly eat away at your brain, whatever. Hypnotoad just shows up, like they show him on the screen, and everybody's immediately hypnotized and just in awe of the Hypnotoad, which kind of fits right now with TCU because everybody's in awe. Like they beat Michigan. They're going to go face Georgia in the national championship. So
you just see the Michigan staff on 4th and 2, and they're like, do we run it here? No, Philly special. There's Hypnotoad here.
So let's get cute. Philly. Let's do it.
No, the Hypnotoad told them to Philly special it.
That's true. It's true.
No, I got the wrong psychedelic frog
close
cartoon
though, very
reference.
close. Very
I was going to say,
same guy. Just
how deep is this arsenal? That's
how deep do you want to go, sir?
All right, we'll move to the second quarter and take a look at the Peach Bowl. All right, so this matchup, Ohio State in Georgia. Georgia hangs on to knock off Ohio State. They will match up with TCU. I'm not going to lie, when we knew that TCU had the win, biased in fan pride aside, I was like, the matchup of TCU and Ohio State, I think, would be better than the matchup of TCU and Georgia. And so maybe a shade of me wanted to see what that matchup looked like.
Are you saying you openly rooted for Ohio State?
No, I'm not quite going there. But I think that would have been between that offense and maybe if Harrison could have gotten healthy before that championship game, seeing Duggan and Stroud just duke it out, like we could have had a 60-60 like kind of game
Regular.
on the big stage. Yeah, like it would have been tremendous. I think Georgia and TCU is a little bit different. I'm not really sure how it works, and honestly, I didn't really see how TCU beat Michigan before that game. Now we know, and I think a big part of it was Michigan got in its own way. I think it would take something like that for TCU to beat Georgia. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but are you both with me before we look at this game specific with Ohio State and Georgia?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I watching Georgia against Ohio State gave me a bit more hope for TCU because Ohio State really had to dig into the bag of tricks in order to get the win. So I mean, Georgia hasn't faced anybody even close to TCU. Same thing. Max Duggan is not your traditional going to sit back in the pocket and throw it. He's going to run it, and he's a big, strong runner. Like he can bully you to get the first down. So I mean, this gave me a lot less confidence in Georgia, a little bit more of faith in the Hypno-Toad could at least keep it close for the national title.
I give TCU a better chance to win.
Okay.
Michigan has a better defense, and according to statistics, Michigan has a better defense nationally than Georgia. So why would we say that Max Duggan does this or Duggan does this against one of the best defenses in the nation, but he can't do it against Georgia? I mean, honestly, if we were to rank the defenses, would we go Michigan, Georgia, Ohio State, or Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State? Like, how would we rank them? Because honestly, I would put Michigan as the number one defense of the three.
Really?
Well, they did bring up a good point though. You look at And this is where I would say that like strength of schedule and who you play kind of matters. Because you look at that first 3 games, it looked like Michigan's defense was, the next college version of like the 85 Bears.
Let's pump the
like
brakes. We did that with Illinois all season long, and
True.
we were okay with giving them the pass until they played somebody that was worth a damn. Michigan's the same way. They still had a dominating defense.
Oh yeah.
So it's one of those that you gotta take one or the other. You can't say Illinois was a great defense, but Michigan, they were suspect because of who they played.
Well, but hang on,
that's what Illinois did too.
Because I think we can have the conversation without necessarily stiff arming and pushing down Michigan's defense. Let's talk about Georgia's defense coming off of maybe one of the best defenses we've ever seen in college football history just a year ago, and much of the afterwaves that are still there and still performing at a high level. I'm not necessarily trying to punish Michigan's defense. I just think we had a generational, maybe all-time defense come through Athens, and we still have some of those pieces that are making plays this year.
I'm not saying Georgia isn't a phenomenal defense, but if you honestly, let's go as far as to say it's a wash to where Georgia and Michigan have very similar defenses in what they can do, and things like that. Even if you go to where, okay, let's drop the rankings and just say they're roughly the same. Right. They're not exactly the same. And people would argue that Georgia is a better defense. And I wouldn't get into an argument on that because that's all subjective. Like that's all the person analyzing it. But honestly, these two defenses, Georgia and Michigan, are close enough in my thought that TCU has just as good a chance of winning the whole thing as they did the other day.
Yeah. That's fair. But I do think it would take something like what we saw in the Michigan game where TCU, again, earned that win. They deserve the win, but it takes Michigan tripping over itself. I don't know that we can count on Georgia doing that.
And I think maybe why Michigan stumbled over themselves is the element of surprise, because for some stupid reason, everybody keeps saying, well, TCU is going to finally fall here. This is where they're going to fall. This is where they're going to, get hiccup. This is where, and they just keep winning, minus the Big 12 championship game.
Yep.
They just keep coming. And even then they were behind and took it to overtime.
Yep.
So like they just keep finding ways to get in that position to win the ball game. And that's another, I don't know. I think the element of surprise is not there anymore because of what they did against Michigan, but I would still give them just as good of a chance to perform as well as they did.
And I imagine Kirby and the Georgia staff has a different maybe sort of mentality about things than in an approach.
I don't know that the bravada is there as much as it would be with the team from Ann Arbor.
So we'll kind of see how that plays.
They
but let's
ain't
focus on this.
Fights in tunnels, I can tell you that.
We'll focus on this game for just a moment, the Peach Bowl with Ohio State and Georgia, because this was a phenomenal game. Of course, it comes down to the missed kick, and I feel horrible anytime we have a situation like that because there's a young man who's dealing with all kinds of criticism and hate mail on social media and everything, and that's really tough to kind of see. Can
I break in real quick and say
Sure.
Anybody that does that is below what they should be as a fan. They're short of being human. They're almost borderline evil. This is a maybe a 22-year-old kid kicking in the biggest stage. I guarantee you 99.98% of the people that are criticizing that kid has never been in that high of a stressful situation. Granted, it's a game, but you know what? Then he knows if he misses, he's got to deal with this crap.
And not only that, but 99.9% of them couldn't even kick a point after try. And I say that because I watched a bunch of just average Joes try to kick a ball in Detroit when we were giving vaccines out there. I watched it and I'm like, it never got off the ground. It's just barely going through. One out of
when Cody Parkey
double doink.
When he hit the upright twice on the game in the playoffs, they held a thing in Chicago where people would be kicking field. Nobody came close.
Yeah. So to me, unless you play soccer, unless you play some other type of college football,
it's hard.
Unless you're a kicker in high school, you got no room to talk. It's hard. And again, people make mistakes. It was already a really just kind of out there field goal. Like Ohio State was trying to move the ball to get it closer so that he wouldn't be in that situation. And Georgia's defense tightened. They just couldn't. Ohio State did everything they could. And this kid is like, all right, well, if this is all you can get me, you got to try. You can't just blame the kicker. You can't do that. To me, anyway.
Well, they did so much to get a big lead and then let it go. Don't put yourself in that position. How about that? It's a going theme for these two semifinals. Don't put yourself in that position.
I agree. I completely agree.
And granted, that's easier to say than done because you know that Georgia's on the other side doing everything they can to get back in it. But how did you establish that lead in the first place? Did you rest on your lead and try to just waste away the clock? And, I don't know that they did, but those are things you were responsible for that. And it's not just the kicker.
I completely agree. And I think for some context for some of our listeners who may need a freshener up, Ohio State led this with just a couple minutes to go. Georgia drives down. Stetson Bennett scores a touchdown. And then C.J. Stroud and the Buckeyes drive it across the 50 and get even a chance at this long field goal at the end. So we had fireworks and blow for blow, rock'em sock'em robots heading down the stretch. It was a tremendous game. And, of course, it just finished on this flat note for Ohio State. But I'm kind of curious to chat with you guys about Ohio State because many in Columbus, I think they still think, given what I read on social media, that the sky's falling a little bit when Ryan Day's just lost the last. I mean, Ryan Day's record is unbelievable at Ohio State. Long term, how do we feel about Ohio State? Because I think a lot of people maybe had taken a loss in confidence after the game where they host Michigan, and understandably so. But if anything, for them to bounce back and really control a big part of this game against the number one team in the country, Georgia, I came away a little bit more impressed saying, you know what? Ohio State is just a couple of tweaks away from being the best team in the country in a year now.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I even said this on my podcast. If you're an Ohio State fan, it's never great to lose. It's never one of those that you're happy about it. And I've said it every single day since Alabama got eliminated from the playoffs. And I hear Alabama fans, we deserve to be in. No, you didn't. There's no such thing as good losses. There's absolutely no good thing as a good loss. But to me, when you look at how Ohio State was, and you think about how everybody really was criticizing Ohio State, not only for the fact of, oh, well, you got back into the playoffs because USC lost, you got destroyed by Michigan, you're going to get destroyed by Georgia. And then look at how well Ohio State hung with Georgia. Now, defensively, you look at the numbers. I mean, Stetson Bennett threw for 398 yards. Also, fun fact, CJ Stroud and Stetson Bennett both had the same exact number of pass attempts and pass completions.
Wow.
They were both, I'm going to double check here to make sure I'm not, making a fool of myself. I believe they were both 22 of 34 on pass attempts and pass completions. And they were exactly 50 yards apart as far as, their stats being exactly similar. Oh, sorry, 23 of 34. I was one off. Darn it. Anyway.
Dang it, Tony.
I know, but for Ohio State, but I know, do better. But for Ohio State to be able to put 348 yards up on, Georgia's defense, and to be able to have CJ Stroud run as well as he did. Now, I know Georgia was giving it up a little bit and they were tightening up more in the red zone in order for Ohio State to score, which is really the only part of this game where Ohio State struggled, especially once Marvin Harrison got knocked out of the game. It seemed a lot of Ohio State's offense basically went out with him, which makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of people that say Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably one of, if not the best wide receiver in college football, right now coming into this next season. So to me, if I'm an Ohio State fan, it sucks that you lost. But you look at what you did to technically the number one team in the country and what has been the number one team for the last 2 years that has now gone 27 or 28-1 in the last 2 years that it's been in college football, with the one loss being to Bama in the SEC championship. And you're probably the one of the closest teams to take them down to the absolute wire like you did. So to me, I wouldn't exactly be upset that you were able to do that to the number one team in the country, coming off of really a huge confidence blow, like Dalton said, against, your arch rival, the team up north. So that's my thoughts, is that they shouldn't be as upset about it as they probably are.
Sam?
They need to ease up. 92% winning percentage. You tell me who you're going to hire in place of him that's going to do that, plus beat Michigan, plus compete for the national title every year, and don't lose, because if you do, you're gonna be on the hot seat. Let's pump the brakes. Goodness gracious, they're spoiled because for 11 years straight they were beating the crap out of Michigan. And Michigan finally developed somebody. And I've got another question about Michigan after this. But why? I mean, yes, you don't ever want to lose to your rival. And if Jeff Brom was around and lost twice to IU back-to-back years, I'd be like, come on, you got to beat IU. But I'm not going to off with his head, because you know what? Who are you going to replace him with? There's no guarantee that you're going to get somebody. Just because you're Ohio State doesn't mean everybody drops everything and comes running when you call. You've got one heck of a good coach there. He wins ball games. Granted, he's lost 2 straight to the one team that you absolutely want to beat every single year. But here's the thing. Do we know what he's going to come back with next year? I think they're close. I think you're absolutely right, Dalton. They are close to being the best. And it wouldn't shock me. Preseason next year, they're number one and touted as the number one team in the country, the best team in the country. Wouldn't be shocked. Would not be shocked. And you're telling me you want to get rid of your coach because he can't beat Michigan?
Yeah, it's funny, and I want to point this out too, because I think one of the big things that still was apparent in this game is that Ohio State's secondary still has some issues. And I think Jim Knowles still has a couple of things to figure out when it comes to this Ohio State defense, because they are close. And you can make the argument that the defense has cost them in those 2 games. But what I find unbelievably interesting about this is that we're sitting here just turning over the calendar to 2023. We probably won't find out if Jim Knowles has Ohio State's defense fixed until the final week in November of this year. Like, for what the Big Ten is and for all the Big Ten strengths, passing offenses for the most part is not a big part of that.
Right.
And you take a look, maybe Penn State, maybe if they get Drew Allar going and things are clicking there, maybe that tests Ohio State's defense a little bit. Maybe their trip to South Bend, if they can figure things out, if Notre Dame can land Sam Hartman in the transfer portal like it's rumored, the Wake Forest quarterback, like maybe then you get another test. But like, we're just going to judge this on another one-off for Jim Knowles in Ohio State. Like, it's really kind of fascinating how little sample size we're trying to make big conclusions on, which is given kind of what college football is. But really, when you take a look at that, like, we have 11 months to find out if Ohio State's got a defense fixed yet or not. And Ohio State's defense was much better this year, but those breakdowns, I think you can say, cost them in both Michigan and Georgia, which is a little bit interesting. We're running a little heavy, so let's go ahead, get to the halftime break, and we'll come back in the third quarter.
You are listening to Big Ten Plus 4, hosted on Anchor and StreamYard.
Hey, this is Russ.
This is Kyle.
This is Michelle.
From the Infectious Groove Podcast. Join us every Monday for the most fun you can have with a music podcast. The Infectious Groove Podcast uses a positive and fun approach as we take time every week to share our jammy jams, then dig into a thought-provoking topic discussing all decades and genres of music. You can find the Infectious Groove Podcast on all major podcast platforms, or you can head to infectiousgroovepodcast.com to find us there and subscribe. We might have a controversial opinion here or there, but we always have fun with it.
Oh, I'm sure I'll say something dumb.
Subscribe to the Infectious Groove Podcast, part of the Odd Pods Media Network.
Hi, I'm Tina Jaramillo.
And I'm Hillary Doherty.
And we host the MICH podcast, where we discuss the dark and sometimes weird true stories in American politics.
Hey, Tina, did you know that Elvis crashed the Nixon White House for the sole purpose of getting a DEA badge, and it worked?
What? Or how a gun control advocate senator out of California engaged in gun trafficking with notorious gang leader Shrimp Boy?
Shrimp Boy, I remember him. Okay, so, we cover all of that and more from maladies, madness, mischief, and murder in U.S. politics.
And we also host a bi-weekly interview segment called Lil Muck.
We interview politicians, journalists, activists, and others who share their experiences in politics.
Find the MICH podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and check us out on social media at the MICH Podcast.
Hit the button
right.
twice.
Okay, so we are running a little bit thin on time. We do got 2 more segments to get in, but I do want to loop back before we move any further, because Sam said he had a question for us, and it was dealing with, I believe, with the subject of Michigan. What was it?
So, Jim Harbaugh has been the coach at Michigan for how long?
Since 2015.
So that's what, 8 years, right?
I believe 8.
Going on 8.
This will be his 8th.
No, I believe coming up will be his 9th. Sorry,
Okay.
I just want to make sure you have
No,
that.
that's all right.
Okay.
And he's made how many playoffs?
2.
This would be 2. Yeah. 2 in a row.
How many has he won?
0.
0.
He's 1 and 6 in bowl games.
Why are we not criticizing him more about what he does in the postseason and what he's doing with a team that should be stacked to win the Big Ten and compete with the Big Ten every single year? And he's done nothing but underachieve except for the last 2 years.
Well, I think, if you're asking me personally, I think that criticism was well warranted, and I think it was there before the 2 years ago. I think you
the
go
past
back
2
to
years have made it better.
Yes, I think that
he's still
proved
underperforming.
Correct, but that's a mountain, again, as you mentioned, that hadn't been climbed since 2011. It had been a long time since
I'm
Michigan.
not arguing that, but like, we're taking Ryan Day, who's winning 92% of his games. He's he's performing pretty well as a coach.
Agreed.
And granted, it's the programs that are whether or not they're mandating this. But honestly, there's not as much. I'm not seeing as much criticism about him simply because he's made it to the playoffs. I mean, Ohio State's been to the playoffs many years.
Well, you got to think, like you said, it's the programs, it's the fan bases. Like Ohio State is upset for really one big reason. They haven't beat Michigan for the last 2 years, and the fact that they're unfortunately underperforming when they do get into the big games. You know, they underperformed against Alabama in the national championship when they played with Ryan Day as the coach, and then they, you technically underperformed, lost, whatever you want to consider it, against Georgia, however deep of a fanatic you are for Ohio State. Whereas Michigan, it's did the other thing, they flipped it around, winning fixes a lot. You, like Dalton said, you got hired in 2015. Ohio State, had beat Michigan, with the exception since 2011.
Ohio State was fresh off a national title at that same year he got hired.
Yeah. And, he, and you think about up until, COVID, there was some rumors like, hey, Harbaugh might be out of Michigan. He was
I had him gone 3 times.
NFL teams.
I had him gone 3 times.
So, and then he comes back after COVID and you beat Ohio State, which for Michigan, to me, that's what matters more. Would they like a national title? 100%. But would they just want to beat Ohio State every single year? For the moment, yes.
So the 2-6 record is okay.
Now,
like that's what I'm getting at. Like
right now. Now, if they lose to Ohio State again, and they're potentially still in the playoff race, or they lose to Ohio State and they lose another bowl game, then you're going to start hearing that again. Because for Michigan fans, what are you doing? You didn't win the game we wanted you to win, and now you're not performing when we need you to perform.
I personally don't think it's going to happen again.
Well, I think there you go.
Meaning both coaches ain't going to be there for that next matchup.
We could talk about that again at some point too. But I do think that when we have this conversation, context matters, because I think a lot of people are looking at Ryan Day as somebody who was just on the staff previously, was elevated and kind of handed this machine that Urban Meyer had really firing on all cylinders and holds it to a certain expectation, where when Jim Harbaugh arrived in Ann Arbor, that program was a mess.
What he had, Brady Hoke. He was stepping in for Brady Hoke, wasn't he?
Yeah, Rich Rod and then Brady Hoke. Like that was back to back, and then Harbaugh came in. Harbaugh was getting you to 9 wins consistently, but wasn't winning you the big ones. And your rivals, Michigan State and Ohio State, had just for a decade and a half just been kind of handing it to you. And I think that dropped not necessarily the standard in what Michigan was striving for, but it certainly tempered fan expectations. A decade of losing will do it to you, where like, hey, we got here now. Now things are good. Like, you know what I mean? I think that completely changes perspective, given the decade of losing that came prior to. I think that matters a lot when we talk about where these teams are with their coaches. But you're right. Now, also for me personally, I find bowl games to be outside of the playoff and a lot of those things, a lot of the New Year's Six ones, to be rather useless. I think you see players opting out. I don't want to take the bowl record to grade, even though, especially as the person wearing Michigan State stuff and having a Michigan State interest, it's fun to take any one of those numbers and poke at it and laugh. Like that is fun to do. I don't see the value in evaluating a coach just on bowl records alone. We can talk playoff bowls. I think that's fair.
That's why I was approaching it in the aspect of he hadn't done much leading up to and then underperforming in the playoff. They walked in a heavy favorite against TCU, and they puked all over themselves.
Yes.
There has to be some sort of coaching responsibility taken on that, because he didn't prep the players enough.
And as we've talked all program long, we still believe Michigan's a more talented team. That would point to you that the game got lost in another facet, and you don't want to directly point, but it points towards the coaching staff in that aspect. I think
you even made a mention in our text line that there were some coaching decisions that were, the Philly special being one, yes, but there were some other decisions that were just like, you weren't sure what in the world he was doing.
The one to me was he didn't use his timeouts with like almost 3 minutes left. I'm like,
did you see the camera shoot over to his dad in the stands, Jack? Yeah. He got up and he's like, "What are you doing?"
What would have been better is if he was up there going, "Timeout!"
I know, I'm
throwing the tee up.
I'm watching this. I'm like, what do you think you're gonna do? Like try to run out the clock? What are you doing? What?
So, yeah, no, you're
So we've
you're absolutely right.
successfully hijacked the third quarter on Jim Harbaugh talk. So I apologize about that.
And we didn't even talk about the latest rumors that if he gets offered an NFL gig, that he's gone back to the league. We could talk about that another time.
I've already thought that. Yes, we will talk about that maybe next week while you're here too, because I mean, well, it may have happened by then, but I honestly think he was just back at Michigan simply because Minnesota didn't offer him a job. That's the only reson why I think he was back in Ann Arbor.
And this is just our annual conversation. We have this every year now with Jim Harbaugh.
It's like
win or
like
lose.
The groundhog, does he see his shadow or not? Harbaugh, does he take a job or not?
Yeah.
I don't.
So
Yeah, it to me, I would not I know the one that he's linked to, and there's rumors that they're going to pay him like $20 million a year if he does, which is absolutely insane for the coaching world.
Let's think about this though. San Francisco was horrible when he took over, and he took him to a Super Bowl. So I don't doubt that he is a good NFL coach, but it's a matter of can he get the pieces and replicate what he did if he gets to Denver.
Well, that's the thing. I'll say this real quick because I don't want to hijack it too much on that. Mike Singletary put a lot of those pieces together for San Francisco.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying.
But I will say, if he goes to Denver, which is the rumored place, I would not touch that with a 10.5-foot pole. You have a $235 million quarterback that played like absolute poop last year. You can't cut him because that's $100 million cap hit against your team. So it's not a guy that you want. It's a guy you don't know what you've got with, and you are going to have to lose pieces on your defense and offense to do it. That is a dumpster fire. I don't want anything a part of. Jim, stay at Michigan.
Well,
there's no jobs right now that if I'm you, I'm like, I got to have that job.
As much as we're bashing the coaching decisions in the national semifinals, let's think about maybe Hackett couldn't with Denver, and that's why maybe Russell Wilson struggled as much. Not saying that Wilson isn't having a bad season on his own, but like there are some coaching decisions that can lend to that and make it worse and make it snowball worse. So I honestly don't know. I mean, they've got pieces that are good in Denver. It's just a matter of can you get a coach in there? And I honestly I don't think it has anything to do with how good the position looks. I honestly think Jim Harbaugh was angry he didn't get to stay in the NFL. He went to Michigan and is like, okay, first chance I get, I'm going back. It doesn't matter. I don't know that it matters where it's at, honestly.
And we'll talk about it much to your point next week, whether we have the news that he's got a job or not. We'll talk about Jim Harbaugh in the NFL a little bit more. But let's get to the fourth quarter before we get out of here. All right, we got just a few minutes here to drink Sam's tears because we're going to switch over to the hardwood for a moment. We'll bypass the other Big Ten bowl games. We'll get to those at some other point. But number one, Purdue goes down to Rutgers. And you might be saying, I feel like that's a little bit of deja vu. Of course, last year, Ron Harper Jr. hit the half-court shot in Piscataway to knock off what was the first time Purdue had ever been number one in the country. This year, Cam Spencer steps up with a big three at Mackey Arena.
After
Fletcher
Lawyer hit a three to give him the lead.
Yeah. So Rutgers hits another big shot in the final moments and knocks off number one Purdue for the second straight season.
Much like Piscataway last year, Purdue hit a shot to put themselves in the lead, and then Harper hits the half-court shot. I don't, and Dalton, you and I talked a little bit about this before we started, is there's something about Rutgers and Purdue. Rutgers has a number on Purdue for some reason, and it doesn't matter, not even just the past 2 years. Pretty much almost any time they went to Piscataway, if they won, it was like, oh, thank God they got out of there with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and by the way,
this was at Mackey.
Feels that,
huh?
Purdue's not the only team that feels that way. By the way,
last year's an example. They beat 4 straight ranked opponents in successive games, but let's say it this way. I'm glad Purdue was number one for longer than the 3 days it was before they got beat last year. But it had to happen. And I tell you what, if they go 13-1 the next 14 games, I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. And that won't happen.
No,
but
no,
you,
it
you should
won't.
be happy if that
But
would.
honestly, Purdue could go into a 3-game losing streak with who they've got. They've got Ohio State and Penn State after this.
That's again, we talked about the inspiration at the beginning of the show being that the Big Ten gets a bit of a disrespect or a shade of disrespect when it comes across the country. People don't realize this grind that the Big Ten basketball season is. There are no nights off. Like, you can't really look at a team and just chalk up a W. Other conferences have at least a program or two where that's a thing. Doesn't exist in the Big Ten. And of course, we see another example of it with Rutgers knocking off number 1 Purdue. Tony, how did you take that in?
Oh yeah, I mean it didn't surprise me. You guys remember when I talked about in the preseason favorites, it was like Maryland and Rutgers were my 2 dark horses. I'm like, those are the teams that are going to mess with somebody.
How could
think
you have
Penn
been on
State-
Maryland? That's amazing.
I think Penn State's going to shock a lot of people this year too.
I love Penn State. I called that one before the year. I don't know how Tony had Maryland. That's amazing.
Hey,
I tell you, I was on Maryland a little bit just because I like the coach. I do like Kevin Willard an awful lot.
It was honestly last year because Maryland and Rutgers, and it was mainly against Michigan State. I was watching them like, oh my
Last
God.
year, they lost Mark Turgeon a third of the way, and then they had Danny Manning interim the rest of the way. How did that give you hope?
I don't know. I was just like, man, this Maryland team is just they're gonna do it. Like, I know they're gonna do it. Like, they're
It's a
just
gut
gonna
thing?
throw. It was a gut thing. And you got to remember too, this is not a bad Rutgers team. Like, they knocked off Indiana, like wholeheartedly.
I
It
do
was
believe that was
63
in
to 48.
Piscataway though, wasn't it?
Huh?
Like they're almost unbeatable in Piscataway.
It's a tough place to play. It really is.
Yeah. So and you remember I even texted in our group chat when I saw that Purdue was number 1. I was like, oh no, the dreaded number 1 spot, because that almost always means they're gonna lose to somebody and they're gonna fall out of being number 1.
Here's the thing.
No,
I totally get that, but at the same time, I have celebrated each and every day that Purdue was number 1 in the country, because growing up, 2 was the highest I ever saw them get. And that was in the 80s when they had, Everett Stevens and it was just it's been a long road. And
did Joe Barry Carroll and them ever get to 2?
They might have gotten to 2. That was maybe, but they got up there. But like Glenn Robinson only got them to number 3. Like they never have gotten up over that hump. And for the last 2 years, and Dalton, both of you, I sent it. The last time a Big Ten team was number 1 in successive seasons was like the year 2000 Michigan State. Like it's been forever ago that a team has done that. So for me to say that Purdue has done that, while I totally get what you're saying is that other shoe's gonna fall. I have enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, in before we end up wrapping up here in just a moment, I imagine this year's been quite the ride, because last year you knew you had the talent where you could be maybe the number 1 team in the country. That was an expectation going into the year with Ivy, Williams, Stefanovic, so on and so forth. This year you come into it and you lose all those guys, and you're like,
we're playing with house money.
We got a couple of freshman guards. Like, maybe we hang in the Big Ten. Maybe we make the tournament. Like, if you look at the preseason rankings, like, hopefully we can play ourselves off the bubble and getting comfortably.
What was it? The unofficial preseason poll was Purdue's going to be 5th.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean,
and it was because they didn't know how those freshmen were going to be.
So to watch these freshmen blossom the way they have, and you watch Zach Edey just turn into just a monster, it's like, wow, this has to be a better fan experience and ride, just because whenever the expectations are low and you come in high or come out high, like that's the ride you want as a fan.
It's playing with house money, Dalton. It really is, because you come in with a certain expectation and you completely blow that out of the water up to this
That's
point.
what you say now, but now you know what the team's capable of, and now the expectation shifts for the rest of the season.
I'm saying up to this point, now I have expectations. Now they should be competing for the Big Ten championship, whereas before I'd been like, oh, well, they finished in the top 3. Good job. Now it's, okay, you guys should be competing. You should be in that last weekend, if not ahead, competing for at least a tie or something, I know there are going to be losses because freshmen still be freshmen, and near the end of the years when you start calling them sophomores,
And I don't think we're going to see a Big Ten champion with a better record than 15-5.
Yeah,
I think
would be
whoever wins this
shocked.
conference, it's going to be more than 4 losses. I just think it's just that kind of year in this kind of league. I thought it was going to be a down year for the Big Ten. I was tremendously wrong. The Big Ten is playing phenomenal to this point. It's going to be a lot of fun. Tony, I had you boxed out for a moment before we get out of here and say goodbye. Do you have anything else you wanted to add on?
Throw the elbows out, keep you boxed in.
I know, right? Just stop it. Don't leave me alone. No, I mean, it is. This is going to be one of those, and you look at all the Big Ten teams that started out, we were like, man, who's going to win the Big Ten? You look at all the teams now that are even ranked in the top 25, and we're kind of sitting here like, wow, like maybe people have a shot. You look at Purdue, they got up to number 1. They're still one of the best teams in the country, even with that loss. They're still, top 5 at least, especially with Texas having 100 dropped on them last night by Kansas State, by the way. Big
It was
surprise.
over 100, wasn't it? Like 120?
12, yeah, 112. I was like,
yeah.
So I mean, Purdue's still going to stay up there 100%. So it is kind of it's awesome, and like you alluded to, you look at Big Ten basketball, it's always a dogfight. Look at Rutgers and Maryland. The two teams were like, well, I wasn't. It was like, yeah, they're not going to do much. Like, I'm like, no, they're going to be a dark horse. Like, you wait, you just watch. They're going to be
by the end of the season. That loss to Rutgers will be a quadrant 1. I think, if it's not already.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And you know what, as we kind of put a bow on this, and we're going to give more basketball coverage in the following weeks because football is really going to be slowing down. We'll fully shift over to basketball. Yeah, who knows? We'll still have Harbaugh conversations through April, but I do want to point out, we're having all these conversations about some of these better Big Ten teams. All of a sudden, we're not talking about Indiana. Indiana, who was the preseason favorite in the Big Ten, maybe here midway through the year, they're a little under the radar when Jalen Hood-Schifino gets healthy with them. And I know he's made his way back a little bit, but we'll be talking some Hoosiers a little bit later on as well. It's something just to keep an eye on that. We haven't been talking about the preseason favorite for the last couple of weeks.
I don't foresee us never mentioning IU again, but it would warm my heart if they underperformed like they have in every season since 2020's happened. So no, honestly, I'm surprised that they've kind of underperformed the way they did. Like when they played Arizona, they did not look good. Like Arizona dismantled them.
And again, they got some injuries and stuff.
Sure,
they'll be okay.
They're better than that. They're better than they might still get beat by Arizona, but they're better than that. So I'm not naive enough to think that when I use better, the conference is better. I understand that, but I love when they struggle.
So I do have to ask Sam real quick. How are you going to feel February 4th if Purdue walks out with an L?
I've watched IU beat Purdue many, many times. I am unfazed by it anymore.
Okay. I didn't know you go into a rage, especially if like the 13-1 that you talked about the next few games is
the one loss is IU. You know what? I'll still take 26-2.
Okay, that's fair.
I would as well. Man, I tell you what, speaking of rivalry games, you're talking Indiana, Purdue, Michigan, and Michigan State is this Saturday. So I'm sure you boys will
get it off early.
Talking a little bit more about that on Friday because that's going to be a heck of a game, as it always is whenever schools and a rivalry like that takes place. But real quick, let's get on out of here. And Sam, Tony, take away the social medias. Let them know where to find us.
All right, on the TikToks, the Twitter, and the Instagram, it's at Big 10+4. You've got to spell out the plus instead of the little plus sign. Facebook, you do Big 10+4. Tony, do you have to be specific?
Nope. You can put both. It's dealer's choice. You can either spell it out or put the plus. That's the best thing about it.
Yeah. Where else?
You can also find us on oddpodsmedia.com. We are the only sports show on that website, but you can also catch a whole other slew of great shows on there, from politics to beer to food, music, whatever is your interest. You got it all. Yeah. You can also catch us twice a week live on the ASAP network. We're doing it twice because we're big. We're 10 and we're +4. I don't know where our other +4 is, but we're going to find them eventually. We're going to get there. And you can also, if you want to see all the kooky, crazy stuff that we do and all my other 19 teams gear that I support, you can also find us on Spotify.
Not all in one show, though.
Yeah,
I will
not enough
try.
time
If
for
I can
all
make
of
it happen, I will make it. I will try between third quarter breaks. I will make it try to happen.
All right. Once again, that's Sam Sprunger, Tony Hollinsworth. I'm Dalton Shetler. Big thank you all to joining us for this edition of Big Ten Plus 4. And until Friday with these two knuckleheads here, Sam and Tony, they'll talk to you then. So long.
See you later.